Welcome to our webinar for this month. I'm Craig Nishizaki from UpTop, and we have Leigh, Allen-Aredondo, and Michael Wu with us. We'd like to have them introduce themselves as well as introduce the topic. And what we're doing this month is we're talking about the 5 most common challenges facing UX designers. We polled internal as well as external user experience designers and leaders, and the topics came back with these answers. So number 1 was mindset, thinking strategically, not tactically. Number 2 was communication, working on cross-functional communication across teams. Number 3 was KPIs, measuring the effectiveness of UX. Number 4 was proving value. And number 5 was scaling design. And we have only an hour, so I'm not sure that we're going to get through all of these, but our goal today is to be educational as well as practical and give you all some tips and some tools that you can use to be more effective as UX designers and as leaders in your business. So with that, I want to have Leigh introduce herself, and then Michael introduce himself, and then we'll get started. Leigh?
So I am head of UX at Spruce Up, which is a startup here in Seattle.
Yep.
And we're just about to launch. Actually, it's probably next week. We're getting very excited, but people can check it out at beta.getspruceup.com. It's a personal shopping for everything home and design.
Great.
So that's very exciting to be part of. I am also the host of UX Cake podcast. Yeah. And
check it out.
It's in like wherever you listen to podcasts, and that website is uxcake.co, and we've got a lot of great content there for people who are probably in the audience.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, thanks, Leigh. How about you, Michael?
Cool. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Wu. I am Director of UX here at UpTop. In case you don't know, it's a design and development agency. I've been here about just under 5 years now, and I have I believe 5 designers on my team, and we're working on some pretty cool stuff, spanning across many industries, enterprise tools, mobile apps. We're even working on a internal product right now, which hopefully will be announced shortly. I think that's about it. I don't do many cool things like Leigh here. I don't have the time because I have 3 kids, but
well, I also have 2 kids. Sorry.
All right. I feel terrible.
You're an underachiever.
You're doing lots of really cool
stuff. That's why you don't have time to read. I get it.
That's why I don't have time to read. And you're reading a really cool book. So.
All right. Yeah. We'll get to that later.
All right. Well, the great thing is both Mike and Leigh have worked on internal teams, leading internal teams as well as agency teams. And so I think we're going to have a great opportunity to provide an inside and outside perspective to each of these. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So let me do this real quick. Some of the questions that came in that kind of drove these topics, I just wanted to recognize some of the folks' questions. So when we had registrants, people asked, Arpana asked, gaining buy-in for research from senior leadership was the topic. Mike asked about applying KPIs to UX work. Joan asked about writing new protocols and methodologies for new challenges. Another Mike asked about justifying to clients, so this must be from an agency perspective, the value and investment in critical research activities as part of a design scope. And so hopefully we're touching on the topics that are really important to you. We want this to be relevant and engaging, and then we're also going to be answering questions. So as you are listening, if you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat bar. Rochelle's going to relay them to us in here, and I'll start looking at them on Slack and asking those questions along the way. All right? Should we get started? Okay, cool. So on mindset, so this is about thinking strategically, not just tactically. This theme comes up a lot, right? And so we were talking about like from a UX, from a junior, maybe an entry-level UX designer perspective, this is a common mentoring topic, right? So what can you guys share if you were mentoring somebody in terms of looking at things strategically, not just tactically? Kind of share from your own experience, and then maybe some ideas around mentoring. Kind of a big question, right?
Sure.
Sure. Good.
So So in fairness, right? Like I came before I was here at UpTop. I came from an internal product team, and it was at Big Fish Games, and we really didn't have the opportunity to really think strategically, at least to the point I think we're talking about here, because there's just so much support around you in a large company. There's so many roles, from project management to development leads to independent researchers and all the folks, right? So even layers and layers of management that usually handle all the strategic level stuff. But from my perspective here at UpTop, it's a little bit, I would say, unfair to ask of our junior and mid-level designers to say, hey, you need to be able to think this way. I know because I was there when I was a junior and mid-level designer. But at the same time, knowing what it takes to succeed here at UpTop, or any agency for that matter, you have to wear many, many hats, right? You have to be that Swiss Army knife. And so what I tell my folks is that, sure, you want to hone your skills as a designer, right? But you have to be able to flex between the layers of project management, which I feel sits on top of that, and even account management yourself, right? Yeah. Which sits on top of the project managers. And being able to go in between all those layers, right, at any given point, especially through, let's just say a discovery meeting with a client. Because if you don't, you're going to lose sight of the ultimate goal or the main outcome that you're trying to achieve for any specific project. Yeah. So I know it's unfair because a lot of times these junior level designers or mid-level designers, they might only have a few years in, right? And experience is a huge thing, right? And so it's like you're just throwing them into the deep end.
Yeah.
It's just one of the things.
That's great input.
Yeah.
How about you, Leigh?
Well, one of the things that we had talked about before regarding this is the expectation as a designer or researcher progresses in their career. One of the things that we look for in a leader is someone who can show that ability to be more strategic. Mm-hmm. So one of the ways, definitely like at Amazon, when I had a fair amount of folks at varying levels, and they would often, and they were struggling with, like you said, having being told to work at the tactical level and things not always working out right because they're being basically told what to do by a PM or a dev. Mm-hmm. So I think some of the tactics that I try to get them to implement like on a regular basis so that the teams they're working with were actually getting used to being asked by them, what's the problem we're trying to solve? That's a really, that's a good place to start, you know? So there's a lot of different times that comes up. It's not just the beginning of the project, it's throughout the project. And someone says, hey, you need to move this link, or you need to something very tactical. And I think it's completely okay, and I encourage people, designers or researchers, to say, well, let's take a step back instead of designing it in this moment. What's the problem we're trying to solve? And keep coming back there, because people will, it's just natural to like jump to solutions. So keep bringing it back to what's the problem we're trying to solve. That's just an example of something that you can do to start, because then that is more strategic than tactical. You might still be focused on this one feature or this one page, but there's many ways like that I think someone can start thinking when you do start thinking more strategically. So for example, I'm working on this feature. If you could do a flow, just sketch out a user flow and say, okay, well, this feature, actually it really relates to this other feature, and you come to the PM or the dev and say, hey, I realized that this is actually, what we're doing here is maybe going to impact this other thing. and just kind of like regularly doing that.
Yep.
Maybe doing user flows is actually another great way that I often see designers not doing.
Yeah.
And it's pretty critical to actually being able to see something holistically. So that might be another thing that you could add to your toolbox.
Yeah, those are great ones. So in terms of when you start thinking about understanding the problem, is it looking at it from a business lens, looking at it from a design and user lens, and looking at it from the technical side as well? Mm-hmm. Is that what you would both agree?
Yeah, I want to say that empathy obviously is a very valuable trait being a designer, but that doesn't mean just being empathetic towards the user. It means being empathetic towards the business, the client, and really understanding the lens that everybody's looking through, right? So a lot of what we do is we start at the end, meaning what is it that what is the outcome that you want to achieve on a specific project? And to your point, the goals is part of that. But, when you start at the end, you want to figure out what's the best approach to get there, right? And sure, you can start with a baseline of very strategic questions that you'll ask throughout the process. But I think a big part of it is really connecting with the client, everybody involved, and really at a human level understanding like a lot of these hidden needs, right? So a tagline that we have around here is being able to dig deeper. And so you can ask all these baseline questions, but it's that ability to take a nugget of information that you might get interviewing, the client, and being able to branch off and, uncover some hidden thing that they have trouble expressing, mm-hmm. right? But, and as an example, right, like your stakeholder might be relatively new to the company, right? And so besides success for that project, their ultimate goal might be actually impressing their boss or something like that. But they will never say that to you.
The personal driver.
Exactly, the personal driver. And so you knowing these little things, at least you can kind of drive, the discussion, the project to kind of satisfy that component as well. And having the client know that at a personal level, they will really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, and I think that relates to also the question someone had, getting leadership to buy in mm-hmm. to whatever it is that we think is important as design or research on behalf of the user. Like over and over and over again, I have to remind people, well, do you understand what the business objective is? Right. And do you understand what's driving that leadership? What's important to them?
Yeah.
And then phrase, couch everything that you're doing in how this wonderful design or this wonderful user experience is actually going to get us closer to that objective or
right.
help them meet their goal.
Yeah, I think the pro tip there is your client or your customer internal, whether you're an internal team, FTE or an external agency, is the buyer or the internal buyer, right? What's their motivations as well as the user, and how does that all relate to the overarching business objectives? Trying to tie all that together, right? And so what are some resources or some things that we can offer to people on the webinar that may be helpful? A book or podcast, right? I think on UX Cake, there's an episode number 14 with Fiz Yazdi, right? And
then, that was awesome.
Episode number 15 with Morag Johnston.
Yeah.
If you get a chance, both of those are really solid gold nuggets, I think. Something you can listen to pretty quickly, but pull away some really good tactical and strategic approaches to getting alignment there, right?
Yeah, Fiz Yazdi actually has it was available on the site for a while. I'll go back and check and see if I can make sure that it is for your viewers. But she actually has a kind of this PDF that walks you through a process of becoming more empathetic, like you said, to your business, your stakeholders, so that you can start getting she calls it getting more of the work that you want to do, but it is in line with getting buy-off leadership. Yeah.
That's great. And then Mike, anything?
Yeah, I wanted to just plug this book real quick, Essentialism. This is a book that I'm reading right now, given to me by a former designer that worked here. It ties in tangentially because a lot of the issues I've heard from designers, some from my team, is that strategically it's difficult for them in like a discovery meeting, right, to kind of filter all the noise. And it's a lot of noise. I mean, sometimes it's an hour or a few hours of intense like information just left, right, come right at you. And being able to capture it and know what to do with all that, right? So this book basically tells you, to live life with intent. Again, it's tangentially related, but live life with intent and to really learn to say no to the things that don't matter in life, right? So, and really focus your energies on the things that do, the very few things that do. So you can apply this to your career growth, meaning, hey, if there's something out there that you really want to strive to be, right? If it's to be a senior UX designer, make sure you don't do things in life that don't lead you down that path, right? Because again, everything you do that doesn't relate to that is going to bog you down.
Yeah.
Right. And you can apply the same principles, I believe, at a project level, right? So again, all that noise, really, shelve all the things that don't really matter and come back to it, right? But do capture it, but don't let that bog your brain down as you're trying to, again, think of a strategy or what have you on a given project.
Yeah, and in line with simplicity, that just sort of like reminded me of a phrase that I use often in the project setting, and everyone always agrees, like developer, business, it doesn't matter because it sounds so good. It's a principle we all want to live by, and so we want our software to do this as well. Let's start with simple and add complexity when we see that we need to add that.
There you go.
And so if you're trying to get your team to simplify, that's something you can throw out there and they'll.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I believe that too.
There you go. Get an alignment on that. That's awesome.
Excuse me, I should trademark that.
You should. All right. Well, let's move on to the next topic because I think these are all interwoven, right? And it's about communication, how to be more effective. And on that note, there was a couple of big points in there. One of them was cross-functional team communication. And then also misalignment of stakeholders, where people have their own motivations or their own priorities, and how to get everyone aligned into a vision, right, or a strategy. So why don't we start with Leigh on that one, and I'll have Mike kind of pop into that. But any thoughts around, you want to start with cross-functional teams, why it's so hard to get communication working?
Yeah, sure. It is hard, and another UX Cake podcast with the Sure Ones that actually just the most I redid that one. So number 19 is about cross-functional teams, and they actually have a new book coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And it launched yesterday, I think, called Turning People into Teams. It's a fantastic book. So many great, really useful techniques that you can use when you're working with a team or cross-functional teams. But the question being, how do you improve or how do you...
I think part of it is, why is it so hard? And then, because I would think all of you would agree.
Because we're people.
Because we're people, and we have our own priorities, right?
And it does go back to that, being empathetic and understanding what everybody is trying to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Personally as well as professionally, like for the project. Another thing that is really important to remember and to start off with is to realize that we all are going for the same goal. We all want this project to be successful.
Yeah.
And if there are any ways that you can kind of help your team understand that's what that you're all on the same team. Unfortunately, teams often start acting like they're not teams.
Yep.
Especially if they're cross-functional, because then you've got a person who's part of multiple teams. So, coming to the place where a person, if all you have is control over is yourself,
yep.
Coming to the place where that person's coming from is something to think about.
Yeah, that's great.
So I'd just like to add that we actually had a recent exercise here at UpTop trying to improve the cross-functional relationship between design and dev. And so what we did was we just started by holding a little impromptu meeting in the kitchen. And we started with listing out all the things that were supposedly issues to improve upon. So I would say start there, because a lot of it could be very easy to solve, right?
Low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit, right? And so what came out of that was, hey, there could be physical barriers, right? And there was. The dev team sat on that side of the office, design is on this side, right? But they're working on the same project. So in terms of communication, there's always this gap, this physical gap keeping everybody apart. And so one of the changes we made recently was just grabbing the devs and plugging them into the design area because there was enough seating. But that alone improved things, right? Then we looked at our cubicles. I mean, literally there's a little bit of a little wall, which people just started breaking down. And it was like, oh, I can see who's there now, right? So those are, again, low-hanging fruit. Some other things is, taking a look at your tools. We use Slack all the time, which is great. But at the same time, I'm a little bit old-fashioned. I mean, if the person I'm trying to talk to is right next to me, I'm like, hey, come bug me. I want to talk to you, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times having that old school kind of communication is great to have. I mean, there's just no substitute for it, right? Other things is, in terms of tools, we a couple years ago we bought a bunch of these foam core boards just laying around the office, and what that was meant to do was to spark a lot of a meaningful collaboration, and it's been used widely ever since then.
How do you use it for collaboration?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about, well, for one thing, being able to pin up artifacts related to the project instead of hovering, two people hovering or more people hovering over one monitor, you could hover over this 8x10 board and everybody can see the entire project team, right? And they could put post-it notes on it and stuff like that and really interact with it.
Yeah.
So that was the goal of that. But yeah, I mean, if there's anything else, I would really just kind of see what the issues are and kind of go from there.
Another couple of little hacks is, most companies have big screens in their TV screens now that they use for presentation in the conference rooms. And so with those, either the foam boards or a whiteboard, just grab a projector, project up on that, and then do your collaboration there. Because you're not going to stick Post-it notes on the TV screen typically, right? But it's just a way to get people involved, right? And a big part of this, I think, 3-4 years ago, we started doing more workshopping with our clients early stage, right at the beginning of a project. And getting all those stakeholders in the same room to be able to tell their side of the story or tell their story, what their motivations are, et cetera, you really start to find that there's a lot of trust issues, right? We're people. People have trust issues. There's baggage. There's all these things. And by getting people working together in a collaborative manner, you're able to break those walls down as well. And so that's been helpful.
Yeah. For remote, because I know that there's a lot of teams that are distributed. One of the things that worked really well with a particular designer and his dev team at Amazon, well, the designers sat together. So he would go to the dev team like twice a week and just kind of sit with them.
Mm-hmm.
But also they had developers elsewhere. And they would actually have the developers up on the screen just working all day.
Yeah.
Only during the times when the time zones were the same. So it's not always practical. But there were enough 3 hours or so when the time zones matched up. And so just having them there, on the web, the camera was on and they could,
That's a great idea.
It felt like they were sort of in the room.
Right, to really address that.
Yeah, and they were just working. They weren't talking to each other for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Everybody was just working, but that you knew that person was there and you could say, hey, Steve, can you, what do you think about blah?
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting too, because from our perspective, oftentimes we're brought into situations where there may be some tension between a web team or a development team, a marketing team, a business team, etc., where the business and the marketing team have a vision and a strategy that they want to execute on. But historically, there's been some things that have happened with ghost IT or shadow IT and things happening outside of the normal protocol, right? And so we're brought into a room where we're kind of doing some discovery, and that tension starts to come out, almost like a family therapy session. But really the role of the UX team, because the UX designer or the strategist or the lead sits in between all those people, you have a lot of influence or a big opportunity to kind of bring those groups together. And if you think of it like a Venn diagram, and you have business, and then you have design or users, and you have technology, the closer you can bring those circles together is where the innovation happens, right? Yeah. And that's the unity and the cohesiveness, being able to accelerate creativity instead of blame and things like that. And I think that's where those of you that are on the webinar have a big opportunity to make a huge influence or impact on your business.
And that gets back to internal relationship building.
Yep. Outside of just work,
Yep.
Personal relationship building, right?
So important.
Yep. So that's why I like working with you designers.
That's why we like working with training. Because he likes working with designers. Right?
Absolutely. Actually, I like working with almost everybody. There's a few people, maybe not, but. All right. So one of the next topics, kind of keeping us on task. Resources for communication, like Leigh said. The Sherwins, the book called Turning People into Teams. Mm-hmm. So new book that's out. We'll give you a list of these resources after the webinar so that you can look them up on your own. The next one is one that always comes up. It's KPIs and measuring effectiveness of UX. And, what are smart KPIs to measure? There's some things that are direct. There's some things that are indirect impacts. Leigh, we had chatted about the HEART framework. And so I'd love to have you start kind of talking about the HEART framework. Again, we'll give you a link to this information from your perspective, and then we can talk about some other things as well.
Well, the HEART framework, if you just Google HEART framework, there's so many various ways to implement it, but HEART is happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task completion, or something like that. And so the adoption, engagement, adoption, retention, those are really common KPIs. It's the happy and the task completion that kind of bring that user focus to it. This was developed by some folks at Google Ventures, by the way. And what's important is to understand what are the various ways you can measure these things, because some of them are quantitative, some of them are qualitative, and then task completion, for example, you can look at how many people get through a particular funnel quantitatively. But qualitatively, you really need usability studies to understand if people, what people are actually, or how people are actually doing it. Happiness, again, you can measure overall satisfaction and through surveys and likeliness of coming back. But that gives you a piece of the picture that's not really telling you how are people's emotions going through their experience with your product or service or end to end. So there's a number of ways that you can measure that. It's important that you understand what they are and how you're going to measure them before you tell your leadership, hey, we need to start measuring this. You need to understand why, and why your business would really benefit, to add it to their KPIs, because it's a big deal to get something added to your company's KPIs. But another tool that you can utilize for happiness in particular is it's called user. It's a way of there's a framework. I'll give you the link you can share, but it's kind of like this survey that usability.
Is this score?
No, it's a user. It's a way of. It's like a user survey for emotion. And people they self-select how their emotion is when you ask them. It's like you would use it in a usability study. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, totally agree. I think I wish we did measuring KPIs more here at at UpTop. I think from a project lifecycle standpoint, we're usually not pulled in at that stage. Although there are certain projects that we do it on, but I do agree having a balance of quantitative and qualitative metrics to measure KPIs is very important.
Yeah.
And just being able to talk about that,
course,
it shows your leadership that you understand
Absolutely.
that business objectives are very important to us.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So project by project type examples, right? So for instance, with the Laugh Time study that's happening with the Laugh app, it's being used with elementary school students in the Seattle Public School. And they're actually testing emotional state before and after, and then observing behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a real life, hands-on type qualitative study. Oftentimes when we're looking at improving the conversion or those types of metrics, you're looking at quantitative and qualitative, right? So looking at analytics and user behavior monitoring tools to get the why, or not the why, to get the signals and trends, and then doing qualitative to get the why. Why is that human doing this? There's other things. There's work that we had done on a troubleshooting wizard. This was years ago for the Amazon Kindle. And their measurement that they wanted to achieve was reducing the number of phone calls that were coming through customer service that could have been self-service. Right. So again, it depends on where that experience is in that customer's journey, the measurements of what you're going to track and how you're going to track it. There's lots of different methods for it. Right. In terms of some other resources, there was a really good Jared Spool blog post about measuring ROI and different ways to measure it, whether it's reducing the cost of support. Again, kind of that Amazon Kindle troubleshooting example, or if it's, again, an emotional state, satisfaction, things like that. But there's always the need for quantitative and qualitative viewpoints, right?
Yeah.
I think if you're just looking at one, you're kind of missing a big chunk of the story.
Yeah, you can find out what, but not why.
Yeah. So just some folks that had asked about applying KPIs to UX work. From whether your current projects or previous projects, thinking about some of those. What are some? Do you have? I don't know if this is putting you on the spot, but any examples of outside the box kind of KPIs that you would have tracked?
Outside the box, huh?
And you can pass. We can always go back to it and give the resources later because I didn't ask you these before.
I don't know how outside the box it is. Maybe for some people it is.
Some people.
So like what I do every week as part of my report on company KPIs is we have a survey that measure, where we ask people a whole bunch of things. But we're trying to understand how satisfied they were in a lot of little places. So that is sort of our happiness. I guess that's our happiness measurement. And because I have to report these every week, I have to think of new ways to get people to fill out these surveys.
Yep.
And then even go out and talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really good thing to make UX the owner of.
Yep.
That is a little bit out of the box for a lot of companies. It's not UX isn't always responsible for a KPI necessarily, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and probably not outside the box, but looking at obviously task completion rate, but then also time to complete a task, right? And measuring whether or not they're using navigation to get to that specific task, or are they getting there through search? Those indicators will tell you whether or not like they tried to navigate, couldn't figure it out, so they eventually went to search to figure it out. Looking at all these different metrics will help form a clearer picture in terms of how successful your UX is.
Yeah, that's great. What's interesting is with new things like voice UI and augmented reality and those types of things, it'll be interesting to kind of see what the KPIs, how they morph, right, in terms of measuring that, or tools that we would use.
Yeah, because emotion is super important. Like, to get people to continue using a voice, you have to really reduce frustration.
Yep.
And that it's a different way of even like testing.
Exactly. It's exciting, right?
It is.
Exciting times in the UX
fun.
space.
Yeah.
So let's see, the next topic, actually, this is a great one. Again, it ties into KPIs, it ties into communication, it ties into mindset. It's proving value. So a common thread amongst people that had answered the questions was justifying the value of research, and then other ways to prove value as a UX designer. And Magnus Revang is a Gartner researcher that I speak with a lot, and he has a great quote. He says, "When you skip research, the project actually becomes more expensive because you add features to gloss over the fact that you don't know the real problem that you're solving." And I think that is, I think people kind of know that, but I think it's still hard for people to say, we need to do research, because they have this fear that it's going to take a long time, it's going to cost a lot of money, and we're going to find out what we already know.
Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah.
So
You
hear that a lot?
All those things.
Yeah. So what are some thoughts that you can share with the audience, about justifying the value of doing research? And then also there's some other things in here we'll get to next.
I take this first. I have two thoughts. I think the first one is knowing who the client is, right? So there are clients that are engineering led. So it makes sense a lot of times that they're going to be like, hey, you know what? We're going to build this first, or their product already started building a prototype, right? And in terms of the research that we typically would like to do, it's just not going to happen. A lot of that testing is going to happen when it goes live, right? And that's fine. That's just a different approach, right? Going out with MVP, learning from there, and just iterating on that. Probably a little bit more expensive way to do things.
Over time, right?
Of course. Then the flip side is, hey, when a client, at the end of the day, at an agency, a client is going to have to pay for it. So it is very difficult to kind of do all the research that you want to do as a designer, especially. But that's where we have to adapt, right? Adapt, to be very lean. And there's a base level of research that I think we need to do in order to do pretty good work. And then there's this ideal research perspective. And I think, going back to what we were talking about, the junior mid-level designers, a lot of these folks who come in, graduate from these UX programs or whatnot, and there's no limits, right? They have projects that span multiple months and have all the resources in the world. But the reality is, right, you come to an actual job and work on a real project, you're not going to have all those tools to work with. You're going to have some real constraints. So again, just being very lean, adapting your approach, and not fumbling over the fact that you can't do what you were taught in school.
Yeah.
Right. You may get 80% there, but that's fine. I mean, this is the real world.
Yeah.
So I think just accepting that fact, and again, just finding the research that's meaningful and doing just enough.
Yeah, in that case, and I think that's also internal, right? Because the using external resources or internal, there's still a cost, right?
There is a cost.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
but what you have to show is the value of that cost. And I think there's no other way to show the value than to actually do it. And so you can do a lean method even if that's like cafe testing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't ask for permission, just do it.
Yep.
Actually, it really helps to get somebody on your side. Typically, there's someone else. You're not the only person in the
Right.
entire group who thinks it would be useful to talk to your customers. Whether it's a PM or dev or another designer, whatever. Get someone else to sort of help you maybe come up with a plan. Because it does take some time. But I have a story that I like to tell. It's a really great example of the group that I was in at Amazon did not have research resources at all, and they were not used to doing research. Very little usability. Every once in a while, because they were expensive, because they went outside for them. There was a particular project that came onto my team. I knew it was not a good idea. One thing in particular, but the PM was just completely like, we're just going to do this. We're going to test it. We'll test it. We'll build it and then we'll test it.
Yep.
Because Jeff B is the one who said we should do this one little thing, and I'm like, he probably just threw that out in some meeting, and he didn't think it through. And we're designers; it's our job to think it through. So, I wasn't the designer; I was the manager of the team. But I knew that I could set aside a day, get some people in, test them on this prototype that we did have some wireframes, and prove that there were some issues. To her credit, she came in and watched all of them, which was great. It's very important piece of the whole why this was so successful. But from that time on, and she did see that it was problematic and why. From that time on, that PM, who's now a GM, actually became a complete convert for doing research, and was asking for it constantly, like more than we could even give. And we actually started getting budget for it.
That's awesome.
That wasn't the only reason, but that was what turned her into a cheerleader.
Yeah, that's a great story. There's a company called Hyper Island that has 4 rules of design thinking, and the 4th one is the rule of tangibility, right? And what you did there was you made it tangible for that person to see the impact, right? And it's when you do a usability test or any sort of observation, and you can actually watch the person and hear the verbatim of what they're experiencing, there's a big impact versus just seeing a report, right? And that's what I've been able to experience along with researchers, just watching that person have their aha moment of, wow, we should do this a little differently. And there's power there. In terms of other than justifying the research, right? Proving value. I think something that I like to always say and hear is, the purpose is for us to deliver value, not artifacts. And when you kick off a project internally, externally, or you're talking with a stakeholder or a client, like interchangeable, right? Let's say, proving value to them early and often, I think, is really important, rather than kind of having things drag out, right? Do you have any tips as to how you start things off with a new initiative or a new project, et cetera, to kind of gain that trust that you're going to be proactive and moving things forward, or any things that you guys have learned over the years that have helped your teams create that influence and prove value?
You probably have your processes down on that because you're an agency, and so you have to have something that's repeatable, right?
Yeah, as you well know, Craig, when we kick off any project, we usually like to begin it with design workshops, right? There's a whole lot of reasons for that, to get everybody in the same room, like you talked about, business, dev, et cetera, design, for that alignment purpose. But prior to that design workshop, we like to do this pre-workshop 1 week in advance, intake of all the existing resources that they have, and we just sift through all of that and provide a lot of a baseline foundation for that design workshop. So we're not starting from scratch, right?
Yeah.
Blank canvas. And we come in there the moment the design workshop starts. We're in there talking about all the different research that they provided and our analysis of it, and existing questions and flows, et cetera, what we see is working and not working. But that's enough to spark that conversation. And again, to prove that value that we're not just here, and it's not just any other meeting.
So are you starting
It's just showing up, right?
like stakeholder interviews and
Yeah, in some cases, yes, we'll do some prior interviews if we can. Otherwise, that will probably be handled in the actual workshop. But if we're, for example, redesigning a existing application, we'll have printouts and flows of what that application is, all the different pain points that we see, different spots that the data has basically called out that are trouble spots, right? So we'll pinpoint all these things, and a lot of times the customer will come in and they're like, "Wow, I didn't realize it was that bad," right? Because they don't visually see things. Sometimes they'll experience it, they'll hear it through their coworkers, but they don't see it all up. And so when we show them an all up picture, they're just like, "Wow, I just didn't know it was that painful." So it was, it's a good reminder. But that's one of the things that we do.
Yeah, so setting the stage by doing groundwork, right?
Yeah.
Groundwork and preparation, so that when you walk into that meeting, you're actually leading the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just starting the meeting, right?
mm-hmm.
I think that's a great tip.
You can also, I think, if you don't have the resources to start with a workshop, you can start with a heuristic, with stakeholder interviews and a heuristic evaluation, which kind of sounds like is the lean version of what you're doing. And people can find out how to do a heuristic evaluation online, because there are a few different ways of doing it, but that might be a lean way. Starting out.
Yeah, another example is, we the outputs tend to be prototypes at the end of the day, because we do a lot of envisioning projects. And going back to something I said earlier about digging deeper, it's a good question to ask, who is this prototype going to be presented to? Because ultimately, the stakeholder we're working with is going to show either the CEO or somebody at the C-level. And to get a little bit more insights into how that person kind of operates, is very valuable. So what we've heard in the past is, oh yeah, this person really responds to high visuals or animations or delight. And so we'll focus our energy into adding that on top of the prototype so that they can walk away with, again, nothing but positive things, right? So those are just the little things, again, but you won't find that out unless you just dig a little bit deeper and connect with the customer.
And I think kind of going back to the very top of the hour, right? Proving value oftentimes is asking the right questions. So thinking about strategic questions versus tactical questions, and building your toolkit around that, so that you're not, what I've found oftentimes when people are nervous or they're maybe in a new area that they don't understand too well, they jump back to what they know, and it goes from a strategic conversation down to the weeds too fast. And when you get down to the weeds too fast, the value that you bring isn't there. And so the stakeholders, the client, the customer, the internal team, whoever it is that you're working with, automatically devalues your value because you're asking things that are down here when they should still be up here, right?
Yeah, you have to know your audience for sure.
Knowing your audience, right?
But also, like you said, starting with asking the right questions, starting out with what problem are we trying to solve?
Right.
And you'd be amazed when you get all those stakeholders in a room and say, what problem are we trying to solve? Often, there's different ideas about what problem are we trying to solve and why.
Yeah, and getting alignment on that.
And this sounds very obvious, but knowing how to read a room, seriously. I mean, you alluded like having all the stakeholders in a room, and if you're doing a design review, right, you have to know what they're thinking. Again, empathize with what's going on in their mind, because again, if you're at the we level, oh my God, you're done at that point, right?
So if you were coaching a newer or a junior designer that's aspiring to come into a design review, right? Would one of your tactics be to have them shadow you, or how would you kind of help them get familiar with reading the room? Or do you feel like that's something that's innate to people?
It really helps if you can do some work before the meeting. We also did a whole podcast episode. Sorry to keep.
No, this is great.
But on UX presentations, and that's presenting your work, and that pre-meeting meeting is really important. Like, find someone else that you can get intel from. You have to be a little bit of a detective, and so figure out who's going to be there, find someone who knows them, figure out what their MOs are. And there's really no other way to do it. You can't walk into a room blind and find out through, talking through the meeting what everyone's MO is.
No, I absolutely agree. I think a manager I had back when I was at Real Networks, this was years ago, taught me that exact thing, right? It's like she basically said, go into a meeting with a narrative, right? And that starts with the pre-work,
be prepared.
Right? Be prepared. Have a strategy for how you want the discussion to go. But at the same time, you have to almost map out the different scenarios of how it might not go your way. So you're prepared to pivot, right? You have to do that. The preparation is everything. For sure.
And I think one of the big challenges is, and actually one of the more fun challenges oftentimes, is you're working with someone that's a visionary or a change agent, and they haven't been able to articulate the things that they want. They kind of know where they want to get to. And so in those types of meetings, the first review, you have to position it as, the goal today is to swing the pendulum. We're coming to you based on the information that you've provided, and there's a lot of gaps, and we want to set the direction. So whether they respond positively or negatively, you're accomplishing your goal, right? And then they know that there was a purpose there, not just that you totally didn't understand them and you designed this thing, right? And so it's being savvy like that in terms of working with those leaders, because the leaders are who's going to pull you along with them throughout the organization, right? Your design work is going to have legs and go without you, and you can't always be there speaking to it, right? Is that fair? And so I think from all your experience, you both do that. But for those of you that are out there that are aspiring, learning that lesson, I think is a good one.
Yeah.
Right.
I also wanted to add that you have to surround yourself with folks that are outside of your area of expertise, right? Business folks, right? I tell my team to hang out with you, Craig, go to lunch with you, sit in on your business development presentations, right? To really understand the lens through how you look at things, right? Because if you don't, and all we're doing is hanging around with designers, that's all we're gonna know.
Yeah.
So you can read all the resources in the world, which is fine, but really surround yourself with different.
Be well-rounded.
It's really critical, and it's stepping outside your comfort zone sometimes. Which is also a really important thing to do. Is to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I agree. I think that's it's interesting. A tip that some designers I met, or that I worked with, and that we've met outside, is they've done improv comedy classes to become comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I did that.
Did you?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a great experience.
Great experience.
I totally recommend it.
Awesome.
It was very uncomfortable at times.
Yeah.
It actually was fun though, and I'm so glad that I did it.
So for those of you out there, improv classes might be the next step to moving on.
And
up.
it was filled with other people who were just as or more uncomfortable than I was. So, and it's a safe place. And,
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, we only have a few more minutes left, and I don't know that we're going to get too deep into the next topic around scaling design. For the proving value topic, we'll post a presentation that Mike and I gave at a CMO summit last year about incorporating design thinking for impactful change. There's some stuff in there that I think you can take back as statistics around the value of design, ways to communicate internally to get buy-in and things like that. So we'll put that up as a resource as well, if it's not already up. And we didn't get into the very tactical things like around accessibility, and around, there was a question about nested menus and things like that. I think we wanted to start with, hey, these are the overarching things that people face as challenges, because if you're not able to have impact and show value and communicate well, those things won't be heard, right, by the audience or by your stakeholders. So I think instead of hitting the scaling design piece, what would be, if you were talking to yourself 10, 15 years ago, as you were kind of coming up the ranks, starting off as an individual contributor and now becoming a leader, what's some nuggets you would tell yourself or lessons that you've learned? It could be failures, but what would you say?
Well, for me, I think I've learned so much being at an agency. It's been dog years, seriously. It's been not quite 5 years, but the amount that I had to learn because of the different hats and the different roles. Some of it being forced upon me, which is fine. The uncomfortableness of learning that. But I think if you had a chance to start off at an agency, it would probably do better for your career growth. But again, you can't always control that. Just like me, started off the other way. Totally fine. That's just one thing that I realized.
So at some point in your career, work in a consultancy or agency type role?
For sure.
Okay. What would you say?
I think for me, I wish I knew earlier the importance of being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and how that's okay. That internal relationships outside the design group, which feels comfortable, was a key in my leadership, in accelerating quickly, in my 20s and late 20s, was the ability to really connect with developers who were maybe there was earlier in my career, there was a developer, nobody wanted to work with him because he was just so difficult to work with. But I don't know how, I just approached it without an ego and I was empathetic. I understood that he thought he had been a designer all these years, that he had designed the product that now I was actually designing, redesigning. So I came to it with that empathy, and just kind of that has really done well for me.
That's great. We just have a minute left, but from my perspective, if I were to talk to myself 10 years ago, almost 10 years into this industry, what I did and what I do on a daily basis is try to understand what it is you're working on. I read this book by Malcolm Gladwell years ago that said it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert or become proficient. So that's 5 years of full-time work. And sitting down with people that are actually practitioners, leaders, et cetera, to kind of understand what the challenges are that you're facing helps me as a business person get a better lens of how we can impact great design or impact businesses or make it better for designers and developers to work together. And that stuff stirs my cocoa, right? I get excited about doing that. And so thank you guys for your time today. Thank you all for your time today. And we're going to post this as a replay with a transcript as well. And then we'll get a follow-up email out to you all with the resources. So with that, we're at the end of our time.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Goodbye.